All right, so today we're diving into quite the figure,
Yeah.
Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
And we've got a whole stack of sources here
Oh, wow.
describing him both as a brilliant military strategist, but also as a leader
Hmm.
who was responsible for just immense suffering.
Yeah.
And then
Fascinating.
our story begins
Yeah.
in 20th century China,
Okay.
a nation in turmoil, after the fall of the Qing dynasty.
Right.
So we're going to unpack how Mao rose to power, the strategies he used,
Okay.
and why his legacy to this day
Mm-hmm.
is still so hotly debated.
Yeah.
And get this.
Okay.
Did you know that his army was nearly wiped out before he even came to power?
Oh, wow.
And that his policies led to one of the worst famines in history.
That's incredible.
Knuckle up, it's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, it's a fascinating and complex story, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And while we can't shy away from the brutality of his regime,
Right.
we also can't deny Mao's impact on China and the world. Understanding his strategic thinking, I think, is crucial, even today.
Okay, so let's dig into that strategic genius
Okay.
in our prep.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that Mao's approach to warfare was different from, say,
Yeah.
Karl von Clausewitz or Sun Tzu.
Mm-hmm.
What made him stand out?
Well, Clausewitz, he focused on traditional state-on-state warfare.
Okay.
Big battles,
Yeah.
direct confrontation.
Okay.
Sun Tzu emphasized deception,
Right.
outsmarting your opponent.
Okay.
Mao was all about what we call triangle building.
Triangle building.
Imagine creating parallel institutions within an existing state.
Yeah.
You've got the people,
Mm-hmm.
the military,
Yeah.
and the government.
Yeah.
So the people provide legitimacy and support.
Okay.
The military becomes a tool for political consolidation,
Yeah.
and the government is gradually formed from within, eventually replacing the existing structure from the inside out.
So it's less about conquering territory and more about winning over the population.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost like a slow motion revolution happening beneath the surface.
Yes,
That's pretty different from just brute force.
it is. Yeah.
Wow.
And to see this in action,
Yeah.
we need to look at how Mao actually used it.
Okay.
The Long March, for example, is often seen as this devastating retreat.
Right.
95% of his forces perished.
Jeez.
But it was also
Yeah.
where Mao solidified his power base.
Okay.
He used that time to build support among the peasantry,
Right.
establish local governance,
Mm-hmm.
transform his army into a political force.
So it wasn't just survival.
No.
It was strategic groundwork for his eventual victory.
Exactly.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
He turned what seems like a crushing defeat into a long-term strategic advantage. It makes you think about how setbacks, even huge ones,
Right.
can sometimes create unexpected opportunities.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
this connects to another key event,
Okay.
the Japanese invasion of China
Wow.
in 1937.
Yeah.
While a tragedy for the nation, it inadvertently played right into Mao's hands.
Also.
Both the nationalists and the communists were weakened,
Okay.
but Mao's guerrilla tactics allowed him to conserve his forces while the nationalists bore the brunt of the fighting.
So he was playing the long game,
He was.
letting his enemies wear each other down while he built strength.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds incredibly calculated.
It was.
Hmm.
And when Japan was finally defeated in 1945,
Yeah.
Mao was ready to turn on the weakened nationalists.
Oh, wow.
The Chinese Civil War erupted,
Okay.
and by 1949,
Yeah.
Mao was standing in Beijing proclaiming the People's Republic of China.
It's a fascinating rise to power, but
Yeah.
we can't forget the dark side.
Right.
The Great Leap Forwards, the Cultural Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
These were periods of immense suffering. And we need to understand that part of his legacy, too.
Absolutely. And that's where we're heading next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Sounds good.
So we just talked about Mao's incredible rise to power. But his rule was also marked by some truly dark periods, like the Great Leap Forward.
Right.
What was Mao trying to achieve with this campaign?
The Great Leap Forward, launched in 1958, aimed to rapidly transform China into an industrial powerhouse.
Okay.
The goal was to basically catch up with the West in record time.
So the ambition was huge, but the execution,
Yeah.
well, that's where things went terribly wrong.
Yeah, it was a catastrophe.
Okay.
Mao's policies, they forced collectivization of agriculture and imposed these really unrealistic production quotas.
Okay.
So instead of tending crops, farmers were pushed to produce steel in backyard furnaces.
Trying to make steel without the knowledge or infrastructure?
Yeah.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was food production plummeted,
Right.
and grain was exported to meet these unrealistic targets.
Wow.
The result was a famine of unimaginable scale.
This was the worst famine in human history, wasn't it?
It was.
Millions dying.
An estimated 40 million people died from starvation.
God.
It's a chilling example of what can happen when ideology trumps pragmatism and basic human needs.
Yeah.
And what makes it even more tragic is that rural peasant girls were disproportionately affected.
Why was that?
It's a complex issue, but several factors contributed.
Okay.
In rural Chinese society, girls were often seen as less valuable than boys.
Oh, wow.
They received less food, had less access to health care,
Jeez.
and were more vulnerable to neglect, especially during times of hardship.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And as if the Great Leap Forward wasn't bad enough, then came the Cultural Revolution in 1966.
Right. The Cultural Revolution was another period of intense upheaval and violence.
Yeah.
It was essentially a political purge designed to consolidate Mao's power and eliminate any perceived threats.
And he used young people, the Red Guards, to carry out this purge.
Yeah,
It's almost like he weaponized their idealism, turning them against their own families and communities.
That's exactly what happened.
Wow.
The Red Guards were encouraged to attack intellectuals, teachers, artists,
Yeah.
anyone deemed a counter-revolutionary or a threat to Mao's ideology.
It was a time of chaos, fear, and denunciation.
Yes.
Millions were persecuted, imprisoned, or even killed.
Yeah.
The scale of human suffering is hard to comprehend.
It's a dark chapter in China's history.
Mm-hmm.
And the trauma of that period still resonates in Chinese society today.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that.
It is.
But even with these horrific events, it's important to remember that Mao is still revered by many in China.
That's right. He's seen as the founding father of modern China, the man who unified the country and ended this century of humiliation.
Right.
His portrait still hangs in Tiananmen Square,
Yeah.
and his image is on the currency.
So he's a hero to some, a tyrant to others.
Yes.
It seems like his legacy is a mix of achievement and brutality.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to reconcile those two sides?
It's a question that historians and political scientists continue to debate.
Yeah.
How do we weigh the accomplishments against the atrocities?
Right.
And it's not just an academic debate. Mao's legacy continues to shape China's political identity and its relationship with the world.
Okay.
But his influence wasn't limited to China.
Really?
His ideas about guerrilla warfare and people's war inspired revolutionary movements around the globe.
We've talked about the impact within China, but how did his ideas influence conflicts elsewhere?
Well, his theories became a blueprint for anti-colonial struggles and revolutionary movements.
Okay. We've talked about the impact within China, but how did his ideas influence conflicts elsewhere?
Well, his theories became a blueprint for anti-colonial struggles and revolutionary movements.
Okay.
Think about Vietnam, for example.
Okay.
The Viet Cong, inspired by Mao's teachings,
Uh-huh.
they used similar tactics against the Americans.
Oh, wow.
They understood the importance of winning the support of the rural population,
Yeah.
blending in,
Right.
making the enemy feel like they were fighting a ghost.
It's fascinating how these ideas born out of China's specific historical circumstances
Right.
were adapted and applied in such different contexts.
Yeah, it speaks to the power of Mao's strategic thinking.
Yeah.
Remember, he was often up against much larger, better equipped forces, both within China and internationally.
Right.
He had to find ways to level the playing field.
Yeah.
His concept of people's war was key to that.
Can you break down People's War for us?
Sure.
What did that look like in practice?
It's essentially about winning the hearts and minds of the rural population before launching any major urban offensives.
Okay.
You build a base of support among the peasantry,
Yeah.
use the terrain to your advantage,
Right.
and gradually wear down the enemy through a combination of guerrilla tactics and political mobilization.
It was not just about military strength.
No.
It's about winning the ideological battle as well.
Exactly. You have to convince people that you represent their best interests,
Okay.
that you're fighting for their liberation,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be willing to play the long game,
Yeah.
to endure setbacks and hardships,
Right.
to outlast your opponents.
It's a patient and persistent approach.
It is.
And it clearly resonated with revolutionary movements around the world.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, were there instances where his ideas were misapplied or had unintended consequences?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something historians continue to debate.
Okay.
Mao's ideas were certainly powerful,
Right.
but they were also used in contexts far removed from the Chinese Civil War.
Yeah.
Whether those applications were successful or justified
Right.
is a complex issue.
Hmm.
But there's no denying that Mao's influence extended far beyond China's borders.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
Mao, the brilliant strategist, the ruthless dictator, the revolutionary revolutionary icon.
Yeah.
How do we as listeners grapple with such a complex legacy?
It's a challenge.
Yeah,
And there are no easy answers.
right.
We can't ignore the dark side of his rule.
Yeah.
The human cost was simply too great.
Huh.
But we also can't dismiss his achievements or the impact he had on China and the world. It's a nuanced legacy that requires careful consideration and frankly makes us confront some uncomfortable truths.
As we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm struck by the sheer scale
Mm-hmm.
of Mao's impact on China, on global geopolitics,
Mm-hmm.
even on our understanding of power and leadership.
Mm-hmm.
What's a final takeaway you'd leave our listener with?
I think Mao's story reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and facts.
Yeah.
It's about people, choices, and consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Mao's life, with all its contradictions,
Right.
challenges us to think critically about how we view leaders and the impact they have on the world.
Absolutely.
It's a story that stays with you,
Yeah.
makes you question,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully encourages further exploration.
Absolutely. And that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive.
That's right.
Thanks for guiding us through this complex and fascinating topic.
The pleasure was all mine.